My name is Josh Courteau. I'm the training manager with Species 360.
Hello, I'm John Rossi. I'm a touring drummer with a passion for animal conservation. When I'm on the road, I spend as much time as possible visiting zoos, aquariums, and conservation organizations. Now, I want to share those places with you. I'll be talking to keepers, vets, conservationists, anyone who can help me in my mission of connecting my people to animals through their people. Join me on my Rossifari. Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome back to the Rossifari podcast. All right, y'all. So this week we've got something interesting and different and exciting and fun and nerdy, but kind of in a different way than it normally is. So as you heard in his little introduction, today I am talking to Josh Courteau, and Josh is at Species 360, which is a technology solution used for zoos and aquariums and other partner organizations of those things. And they are the creator of ZIMS, which is a record-keeping system that is almost completely universal in accredited facilities. And I'm going to let Josh tell you all about what this system does. But the cool thing is, like I said, it's everywhere. As a matter of fact, just the other day, I actually got to enter records into ZIMS for the first time. I was doing water quality at the Aquarium of Niagara. And normally I just write it down and other people put it in ZIMS. But I actually got to put it in ZIMS this time. It's a very easy to use software. And it was a lot of fun, at least at, that basic level. And I was just like, look at me doing the thing. And now y'all get to learn about what that thing is. And I honestly think it's really cool. Like, this is, you'll hear me talk about this in the interview, but this is one of those programs that is everywhere. And I don't just mean like in every facility. I mean, this impacts everything we talk about on this podcast, and you'll hear more about that. So I'm excited for you to hear all that. But before you do, we're gonna do a couple quick reminders. So don't forget that you should hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, any interviews, or any of the Friday Zoo News episodes. Also, make sure that you are following along at Rossifari on the socials, at Rossifari Pod on the TikTok machine. And also don't forget that you can support the podcast for as little as $3 a month by going to patreon.com/Rossifari. So with all of that said, it is time to get wonderfully nerdily technical. So here is my interview with Josh Courteau of Species 360.
Yeah, we're an international nonprofit membership organization that software as a service. So our primary service is to the zoo and aquarium and conservation community. We're actually celebrating 50 years right now, and I've been with them since 2008, so quite a while, but not the entire tenure. And yeah, my job is to do the end user training. So you figure we're a software as a service provider. That doesn't really mean a lot to a lot of people, but for specifically the zoo and aquarium space, that means paying attention to the animal inventory, the care and upkeep of the collection, as well as kind of facility records information that really just sort of kind of paints the picture, behind the scenes of what's going on with the lives of the animals. And I get to teach people how to use the software. So that's my day job.
Nice. And it's really important and really the software that we're talking about in specific, a program known as ZIMS that we'll talk more about, is like de rigueur. I've never been in at least an accredited facility that doesn't use this. So this is the nerdy computer side of the entire zoological industry, really, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I do have ancillary background in biology, wildlife, and so undergraduate work, and then my master's work is in e-learning, online education. Had 10 years stint at a university in their IT department. So I sort of had these two worlds that I never thought would connect. And then there was this job at this place that made software for zoos and aquariums, and I'm like, well, that's the only place in the world where I can combine my interests. So it's where the geek meets the nerd.
That's awesome. I really love that. And so we actually met at the AZA conference this year. You guys were set up as a vendor booth, and I was wandering the vendor hall, and we hit it off pretty well and had a really great chat. And one thing I guess I'm curious about is, with Species 360 being so prevalent, what do you benefit from? Why do you go to the conferences? Why do you set up as vendors? I mean, everyone knows who you are. So like, what's the help from that?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, so we're kind of a sister organization to something like an AZA. We work internationally with basically all the big associations you can think of. So IAZA, AZA, ZA, US, CA, Australia, CISA, all the acronym soup. And our job as a membership organization, because effectively we share members with all those different associations. AZA, we have about 85 to 90% overlap. And it's just an opportunity for us, especially as a nonprofit, to sort of make our dollars go further. We want to be where most of our folks are, make it easy for them to find us, make it easy for them to overlap. And as a software developer, it's again a sort of a strange beast, because our job is to build software to spec for this really bespoke and nuanced market, and then also to teach them how to use it. Also, be responsive to just day-to-day operational stuff. We also support it. So a big portion of the team that I'm on is a staff of people that are designated to supporting kind of day in and day out questions, both on like how do you do stuff, but also data problems, because we're talking about 50 plus years of data. It's a collaboratively managed block of data, and so there's a lot of opportunity for the data to sort of be confused, sometimes corrupted, or it needs to be adjusted, or people need help on understanding the history of things. And that's our team can be at those types of experiences, interact with people, teach them on the new stuff, just be responsive, be participatory. In the case of, I can speak for myself, but we have, about 3 to 5 people at any given conference. We're also kind of professional members in the associations too. So I teach at the AZA school, so I participate at the professional development courses. At the conference, they have those working sessions. For the European Zoo Association, we actually lead a handful of workshops. Some of our staff are still associate biologists, and so they actually will do some of the planning meetings and stuff like that. So we have a handful of reasons why we go there. Why do we put up a booth? It's not really necessarily a sales venue for us. It's really more about just see and be seen to some degree.
I'm actually curious. I'm gonna take the interview away from you for a second and to me. Yeah. But I'm genuinely curious, because I've thought about doing that for the last 3 years. I have covered the AZA conference, on the pod, and I have gone to meet people and also go to, I go to the sessions and I learn a lot. But I've wondered if it would make sense to set up a booth, not like you said, really as a sales thing, but just to be there and connect with people. And do you find that has been beneficial for you?
Yeah, I mean, as I have to speak on behalf of the organization. For years I did some of the coordination for our conference presences, and it's almost a non-starter for us. I don't know if you remember at the sign-up period, but there's the how many years have you been here kind of wall of fame sort of stuff, and because again the organization's 50 years old, we've basically been there since the start. So to some degree, it's institutional velocity. We just go because we go. It's the right thing to do. It's a great way to serve our community. But I've over the years seen lots and lots of different vendors and lots of different value points for folks to join. A lot of our teaching partners. So we have a licensed product that schools and universities use to teach the product in their curriculum. I've seen schools show up for a couple of years, and I think that's that's been valuable for them in one way or another. I've seen, tons of new product introduction show up. I haven't seen many podcasts, I'll be honest. So that could be, you could be the first. You could check with them and see what they think. But if you haven't also planned to, I would highly recommend planning to try and get to the European Zoo Association conference, because I think you'd really find that intriguing and kind of different cut of the same, what's the metaphor? Different cut of the same pie. But it's a different world, but the same world. It's sort of like a parallel universe.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, the differences. And actually, that was one thing I wanted to talk about. So nice transition. So this year, I also cover the AAZV conference every year, which is, zoo vets. And this year was a joint conference with the European Zoo and Wildlife vets. And it was shocking to me, even though the science is the same, just how different things are kind of seen by each organization and by like European zoos versus US based zoos. And we've talked about that on the pod before, just population management strategies, stuff like that. But I'm curious, when you're trying to make a universal product, and one that not only needs to be universal in terms of each zoo can use it, but like when, there are animal transfers, the records, all that, we'll get into all of that. But is that hard to adapt to like one product, different markets that do things differently, but the same?
I would say that, yes, it's hard. And yes, it takes 20 plus years to do it the way we've done it. So the product that we operate is kind of like, evolutionarily, something else it was in the past. It was something else in the past. It sort of has literally gone, molted almost and developed into what it is today, which is ZIMS. Prior to that, it was a handful of other software with different amounts of adoption. So when I started in 2008, we were at around 800 institutional members in around 76 countries. Today we're at like 1,200 in over 100 countries. So it's, the product itself speaks better in its current form than it did prior, because it was harder to implement. The standards were a little bit more, limiting maybe. So we had, again, evolutionarily, the product is ZIMS today, but prior to that, it used to be a handful of different softwares that we've kind of pulled together into ZIMS. And so different adoptions for those different products. So like the husbandry stuff, which really just pays attention to the inventory, that was kind of the original thing. And that was probably the most well adopted. And that one goes back into the 80s, kind of like the design of it. It was sort of the initial design, back when it was a DOS program. And so it was harder to use. Of course, computers were less accessible and people were less, paper just was easier. So it was a much more niche group that used it. So I say all that to say that I think the primary adoption was in North America and Europe for the first 20 plus years. We definitely had members outside of those regions, but as it went to more of a modern day application, and especially once we got online, it was much more easy to adopt it. We're also supporting 5 languages, which we didn't necessarily support in our older software. So that's a huge aspect of internationalization is making it accessible in the primary language. But really your question's about getting everyone on the same page and standards. And that is kind of, ZIMS in its current form started in about 2000. And the really strange thing about the way we operate is that, again, we're a membership organization. The software really came out of the needs of the community. And so the community itself actually, in a lot of ways, self-organized, self-defined what the use cases were, what the drop-down lists in the product should say. And so in a lot of ways, we were sort of, a pretty unique opportunity to sort of be the organization that ferried the need of the community into existence. And I think that still is true today. We're much more of a kind of a modern software development organization where a lot of what we do is user experience driven and making sure that the product is answering a lot of the modern needs that you need. But still, at the very end of the day, we, like you said, we attend the conferences, we attend the Zoo Registrars Association conference, we go to AZV, we go to YAZA. A lot of what we do is still driven by what the community needs. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like, again, like I said, I feel like it's just such a ubiquitous product in the industry. But I have a lot of, listeners that aren't in the industry, or a lot of people that are hoping to get into it or whatever. So we should probably actually explain like what ZIMS is and what ZIMS means and all those things.
Yeah, Zoological Information Management System, because we don't have enough acronyms. So ZIMS is online records software. If you were using it, your experience would be like it looks like a desktop software once you log into it. Has a bunch of standalone different modules, little programs within the program, and it's really broken out into three big user groups. It's what we just generally call husbandry and aquatics. So that's your daily operations for a zoo and aquarium, and that's your inventory. What are you feeding it? Where are they living? How's their facility management going? And so that's the biggest bucket, and that's really kind of the thing that everything rests on top of is the inventory. So that's a business to business relationship we have with individual zoos and aquariums. So they actually are members. So they operate on a yearly basis with a membership. What that grants them is access to the software. They use it for that inventory purposes, of course. And then that grants them, full access to our services, including our board is made up of members of the community. So they have voting rights. So there's, in a lot of ways, we're very much a membership organization that just so happens to do software as a service. The second user group is the veterinarians. So the vet tech, vet keepers, all of those folks use a kind of a second aspect of the software, which is just roughly, we just call it medical. And that is one of the other things that sort of is really super unique in what ZIMS offers is that for the past 30 plus years, we are a standardized medical records management solution. So if you look at this helps folks who don't necessarily know the industry very well. Everyone knows what it's like to go to their doctor. If you've ever been to your doctor and started practice at a new doctor, you always have to fill out all these forms, and they have to agree to send the documents from one place to another and release your forms. And there's laws, all this stuff about it. And those laws generally are called HIPAA laws. So what's cool about Species 360 is that there is no HIPAA for hippos. So you can easily send the records from vet to vet, and that transfers to those different business to business relationships. So if the animal is moving, which happens very frequently in the community, the entire medical history, is so long as it's in ZIMS, can also go with it. So the continuity of care is something that really makes ZIMS kind of a different solution than folks working in their own software or folks working in spreadsheets or paper. Because again, that continuity of care is awesome. It also then allows, which is kind of like the thing that we're well known for outside of the zoo and aquarium community right now, is because you can license access to the data that gets aggregated at the species level because of all that work that we've done. So all that vet data that we've kept over the years in the roughly speaking, in a couple different buckets. I don't need to get into too much of the weeds, but we have physiological reference ranges. We've got mortality and morbidity analysis, and we've got drug usage statistics. And so that's aggregated at the species level. So information that's really not available anywhere else. There is no other place that has the depth of data we have and formatted in a clean way. So a lot of folks, organizations, testing labs, schools and universities, they can license access to that data because we have it, to the tunes of tens of millions of records. It's really remarkable. And that final bucket is the population management stuff, and that's where the relationship sort of changes. Whereas we're business to business for individual zoos and aquariums that hold their animals. With population management, we're actually relating to those associations. And so that's a service level that we provide to AZA, to YAZA, to the other associations. And they're using ZIMS as the platform to track the stud books. So I think you've talked about stud books before on the podcast, but in brief, it's the population management for captive animals in human care. You want to know how related are things so you can make better recommendations about, who should breed with who and where can you find those animals.
Yeah, I actually did not realize. So I knew the first two buckets very well, but I did not realize that y'all were so heavily involved in the SSPs and population management in general. That's actually really cool. That's that's really important.
Yeah, it's the software that undergirds it. We won't take any responsibility for the actual programs themselves. They're definitely owned and operated by the association. So the AZA, SSPs, and SAFE, and all that. That's definitely the work done by their members. We just get to be the software that they use as a system of record. There's a second. It's an associated product. That is also part of Species 360, but historically it was its own entity. It's called SETI. They're the folks that make the PMX software, which is the actual analytical software that does the breeding recommendations. That's yet another software that the association uses, and it takes the data out of the ZIMS stud books and will actually do the interpretation. So there's a lot of data relationships that are going on out there, and we just get to sort of serve as the software that's underneath it all, which is really fun.
That is really fun, and it's really fascinating to think about the fact that basically all of the things that you just talked about, right? So the population management, the conservation stuff that the SAFE programs are doing, the incredible veterinary care that animals get in zoos and such that help them live longer lives in general, and all that stuff than out, in the wild. All of those things are, like you said, they are done by these amazing people. But it's really ZIMS that allows that information to flow so freely between facilities and to make transfers less painful and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of crazy to think that, like, on any given Zoo News episode that I do, almost every story is going to be something that has something to do with ZIMS in some way. You could break it down and be like, and then this vet did this procedure, which was, brand new. And so then they entered it into ZIMS and other people were able to find it. Or, yeah, and these animals have transferred here. Or, hey, this breeding rec worked out and now there's a baby. And all of this stuff is coming from the same really cool software. That's a big deal.
Yeah. It's an honor to be a part of it. I'm one of the folks who gets to sort of help people learn it, as I mentioned before, and in particular, I get to work with AZA in their courses in the spring, both the institutional records keeping course, which it teaches the registrars how to use it, and kind of like the operational side for the husbandry data, and then we also teach the population management 1 course, which is the stud books, and so it's between the two of them. It's like once a year I get to be a part of this really remarkable multi-generational effort. It really does, especially when you talk about the stud books, it's a voluntary position, which most people don't understand. I mean, yes, it's a day job to work at a zoo as well. And everyone's, covets their roles as their, the keeper role, the curator role, whatever. But when you want to be that stud book manager, you're not getting necessarily paid extra. It's a lot of extra work, and it's voluntary in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, the software that we are supporting, is almost like an open source type experience, because again, it's built to the very specific needs of the associations for that very specific use case. And there's just not a lot of. And there's a lot of really good work being done in conservation, and a lot of amazing work from zoos and aquariums, doing like the in situ work. But this is an example where there's just a whole bunch of work that no one ever knows about. This voluntary, software that backs it is almost, it's almost this open source product, and it's just the heart behind it is so beats so strong. It's really fun to be a part of that.
That's really cool. So I'm kind of curious. One thing that I know from doing this podcast and talking to a lot of keepers, oftentimes on Zoom, is that sometimes there can be, let's say, a learning curve when it comes to technology. And so it sounds like your exact role is to overcome that learning curve. And so how does that, how do you approach that, and how do you find that that works for you? How does that go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm a team of two. We serve on the team that does the support and training, and so of course we have more folks that are designated to the support side of things, and they're sort of my adjunct trainers. But between myself and my colleague Sarah, we're charged with creating all the training resources. Collaborating with associations whenever we need to. One of the things we're working on right now is an e-learning course that we actually host on the Nature Conservancy's conservationtraining.org. That's not my shout out, but that's a good one. And so it's a really cool e-learning platform that Nature Conservancy has put up, and they just host free courses for various different conservation themed organizations. And right now we have two courses up there. One is a keeper and aquarist course, and that's one of the main newer modalities that we've gotten going in the last couple of years to narrow that gap that you've defined there, which is there's on any given day, I think we're upwards of 20,000 users in ZIMS across, 1,200 institutions. So every time zone. We can't be everywhere. We can't be everything to everyone, but we are finding every ways that we can narrow those gaps. And really, most of my role over the last 15 years has been about figuring out how to create resources that I can hand over. So it's about empowering the folks at those institutions who are our member institutions and giving them the resources so they can create the standards of practice and bring up their staff. And so it's a bit of a train the trainer model where we want to give them access to, basically a free library of content that is thousands of pages long, tons and tons of PowerPoints. These courses that I talked about, we've got the Keeper Aquarist course, one that's on what we call our Insights program. That was the data analytics that I mentioned earlier. And then we're going to have one coming out by the end of the year, which is like an introduction on medical. And then in association with the association partners, they have courses for the studbook side of things. One of them for the European Zoo Association is an online course. AZA does an in-person course once a year. So of course I support that, and I actually show up and teach there. But we try and be everywhere and everything to everyone. We try and go to all the associations. So whenever there's a workshop, like IAZA has been doing a course for the last couple of years, a medical course. So we actually co-teach with that as well. BIAZA, so the British Irish Association, just did a medical course as well just last month, and we supported that as well. So yeah, that's kind of our model is get as many places as we can. And then when we have a larger member who needs on-site training, we'll do dedicated kind of projects with them to help them, cover whatever gap it is they have. But it's mostly about just maintaining a really comprehensive library. Every time something new comes out, we document it, we create videos, we run webinar mini-series. We do pretty much anything we can do to stay in front of people.
That's awesome. I love that. Now, I have to ask, so I know you weren't there from the beginning, but you said that, this has been going for 50 years now. And I'm not a huge history buff, but I'm pretty sure that, you couldn't get online and go to zoological records 50 years ago. So, can you give me, a quick history of how this has developed and what it looked like when it was baby ZIMS or whatever?
In the beginning. So we absolutely have a very, I think there's a documentary sitting there unmade right now because it's a very interesting history. Especially just if you look at the foundation, some of the names that were involved in it. So Ulysses Seal was our founder, which sounds like a made up name, but is a real person. So Uli was actually cancer researcher at the veteran hospital in Minnesota, and he also was working with folks who were kind of trying to find normative blood values for exotic animals in captivity. He knew where folks were keeping stuff, and it was all very analog at the time, of course. He knew that he could get access to, let's just say, blood for cheetah, and then he could run the samples and he can get the specific annelids there. But what he kind of was really intuitive in 73 was to know that without having a baseline to sort of tie all those records to, like how related are the animals, how old are they, what is their taxonomic determination correct, all the baseline data. If without that, you don't really have anything when you're trying to create these physiological reference ranges. And so almost, and we say it's the story of the tail that wags the dog, because that was what he wanted 73 years ago, in 73, 50 years ago. And so he along with, I think it was a student, Dale Mackey, they started, standardizing records in one capacity, but then they realized, hey, we need to standardize basic animal records before we can get to what we want, which is these physiological reference ranges. So they, in association with what was the earlier version of AZ, I can't remember their longer acronym, but a lot of different collaborators got together and they came up with this core basic system, which at the time was called International Species Information System, or ISIS, which we've changed our name since then. But yeah, so ISIS was the original acronym, and the ARCS was the original product, and so animal records keeping system. And so that was the baseline software that everyone used, and it was offline. It was at individual institutions. You installed it. First, it was DOS, then it was a Windows application. But because the long-term goal was to have these analytics, they created this concept of a centralized database before there was online solutions. And so these institutions originally, even before it got to the software, they would hand letter these input forms and mail them to our office in Minnesota. And we had a staff of people that would actually transfer those coded records into a punch card system, which I don't think we have time to go into the history of computers, but there used to be these things called mainframes and punch cards. And so the original data was actually hand coded into these, I don't know if it was Fortran or what, but these were mainframe systems at the University of Minnesota, and the records were inputted into a proto ZIMS 1.5 million years ago, and that data has maintained, and it's been migrated each time into the next system and the next system, and now it's part of ZIMS. So when you look at our database today, you actually see records that go back to those hand-coded system records, and that includes historic records like the ZSL, the London Zoo, has back entered data into the 1800s. So we have records that go back to literally like Darwin's era. So it's pretty cool. And I think
that's
I answered your question.
Astonishing. Yeah, you did. No,
yeah,
that's astonishing. Holy cow! Wow.
And then to jump ahead to say we did finally get what Yuli wanted. It was after he had passed on, but we were able to get to the point where we had these analytic blood values that you could base off of this. And that was one of our first analytes that we came out with about 20, 30 years ago. And we've expanded on that, of course. But it's pretty amazing to think this guy had this vision, understood data well enough before people knew what data meant, and could say we need to create a system and get everyone to get together and do it the same way. It's really, really pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's astonishing. And wow, thank goodness for the internet, because wow. I feel like there are a lot more animals in facilities now too. So that would just be a whole lot of punch cards.
Yeah, we've got, I could run the numbers for you real quick, but we've got something on the order of 10 plus million historic animal records. I stopped even paying attention because the number's so big.
That's honestly just astonishing. And I'm curious, I know that you mentioned that you have a heart for conservation and a knowledge of biology and all of that stuff. And so, how does this help with that side of things? I mean, we talked about the population management, which is obviously important for conservation. But beyond that, how does this help with conservation?
Yeah, it's a great question. My story starts in more the wild side of things. So my undergraduate, I studied wolves in the Chequamegon National Forest in Wisconsin for a couple of years, and then I worked for a little bit at a wolf sanctuary in Washington State. And I mentioned that to say that one of and they at the time they were members of Species 360. They were working on the Mexican gray wolf recovery program, which at the time there were no there were no more in the wild in the U.S. So they had been hunted to extinction. So this small little range had been identified, and AZA and the others, U.S. Fish and Wildlife and other folks had partnered together to decide, hey, we want to do a reintroduction. I think I have the numbers right. There was 20 left in the wild, and they collected them all up, and collaboratively captive breeding programs were set up. This is back in the 90s. And while I was there at Wolf Haven, one of their groups that was a breeding population that they were managing was re-released into the wild, and that was one of the first groups to ever, basically get back into the historic range. First ones to take down elk. So it was a restoration project. You can take that story and kind of roughly copy and paste it for other species that I think you've featured on your podcast before, but around the world, there's a handful of really important restoration projects that directly tie to, zoo and aquarium, partnerships. And I think that's the long-term wise conservation and zoos and aquariums, interlinked so firmly, is that we've already been doing it for decades. We have the ability, we have the knowledge, skills, and ability to do it. And working in partnership with governments and with other nonprofits who work in the field, there's this concept of, I don't know if you've covered the one plan approach, but there's this concept of you have, animals in captivity, animals in the wild, and that's sort of the thinking that, and never the twain shall meet is they're separate funding mechanisms, separate organizations, separate worlds, really. But the one plan approach says, no, we need to think about the species and its environment and all of the factors that go into whether or not it can be successfully, a feature of nature, and we have to work together. And so that's one of the aspects where Species 360 data, I think, historically is mostly operated in the captive world. But we're starting to see more and more those boundaries are getting soft and breaking down. We work with some around the world. We've worked with a few organizations and just for the sake of not having checked it before the call, I won't mention them, but we do work with some government agencies that are doing reintroduction work a lot. And so they sort of are hybrid populations where, yes, they're back in the wild, but they're actively managed. And so that data level is as high as you'd expect for a captively managed animal, but it really is, restored back to the wild. And that's where we're starting to see more and more of that's taking place. And I think that all of the lessons we've learned over the last 50 years and, really our knowledge, skill, and ability is there. We can really help with those restoration efforts. And the money follows, of course, and the knowledge follows, and the data that we can get is different. And so we as an organization have to figure out how does ZIMS or how does whatever we become change to account for the fact that it really is different. Wild data is different from captive data. And so we're sort of in the middle of trying to figure out what does the next 50 years look like now that we've succeeded for 50 years doing what we're doing. Next 50 years is going to look a lot more collaborative, I think.
That's really cool. I'm super curious. So if you are a member, institution and you work at one of these institutions or whatever, can you access any data? And I'm asking for a specific reason, and the reason, I'll just say the reason I'm asking is because I know that I've talked to a ton of people in this industry that have gone out and done stuff in the wild and worked with people out in the wild, with these reintroduction programs and stuff like that. And whenever they come back to their facilities, they say they learned a ton, they get really different information. And the people out doing that work also learn a ton and get a ton of information from the keepers about their managed populations. And so what I'm wondering is it possible, if you are a keeper of a species at a zoo and one of the wild populations out there is being, tracked as well, to go in and look at the records and see and compare values and numbers and information about the two different types of animals.
So just if I understood correctly, if you're managing the captive population of a certain species, is there a way for you to look up if there's a wild managed segment? Is that kind of the
and just to
if
you know that I don't know. I don't know the name off the top of my head of a preserve, let's say in Africa, that is dealing with cheetahs. Sure. Why not? I know we do some reintroductions of cheetahs. So can you be a cheetah keeper at a zoo that has cheetahs and look up information about those cheetahs out in the wild? Or is it like you can only look up stuff at your own facility?
It's a global database. There's varying tiers of what access each member the member has access to see. Of course, 100% access for their institution, and then it's a kind of a Venetian blinds approach where window shuts a little bit. That way, folks can't see in. You can't see out as much. That applies, in a couple different ways. And each institution is completely in control of who can see what, and so that's. We're not the owners of the data, so we make a very clear point of saying that, and that's partly why I can only share things in the aggregate. I can't really speak to specific animal holdings, but as each institution really is truly the owner of their own data, there's an aspect of that which is complicated especially when the animal records are transferred, because there's portions of the record that they're the owner of, and that's where a single unified system like ZIMS is really unique in the world, because you can have a unified record, or you can keep the door shut and again kind of keep your stuff private. The vast majority of our members keep stuff in the default mode, which is a little bit public, and so we get the benefit by seeing things like we have a species holding lookup where you can actually enter in a taxa and be able to find out who around the world holds them. That's different than what you're asking, which is released to the wild. So again, that's kind of that next 50 years question for us, is how are we going to do that? Because right now our model really just sort of assumes everything is on grounds, or at least under like the complete care of a facility. So as it goes back to the wild, we definitely have released to wild types of records, but then there's a certain amount of ambiguity that is baked in it from that point on. We assume if it's released to wild, you're not really getting the updates on it anymore, which is not really 100% true. And so it's a different data model when you're talking about wild animal data. And so we're trying to figure out, what's our role in that. But right now, if you were interested, who's doing those release to wilds, you could figure that out in a couple different ways. You could find out who holds them and then contact them, and then that's kind of a business to business question. At the analytical level, you definitely have the ability to see who's holding them, who's participating in breeding programs. Kind of at the aggregate level, you can intuit who's involved. Some specific programs, that's their entire goal is to release, and so that's kind of that's who they are. And so in that regard, that they're kind of already a known commodity. It's not like you're going to find that just because they're in ZIMS, but so it's, we as an organization have to do a really good job of making the data aggregated, which again was back to Julie Seal's original idea, but also private and also under the control of the member. And it's a really fun challenge from a technical standpoint. There's a whole ton of, the science and the data behind that. We have a conservation science team. So we have an entire team of people that their job is to answer data requests for conservation science research projects. And so their job is to figure out, hey, does this request for this type of data, follow within what we can support? And do we have to go to our board, which again is made up of members of associations and around the world? And do we get approval for it? And, so there's a whole system of stewardship that we maintain just so that we keep that data at the kind of the highest quality and also, the highest amount of faith in the members. So
that makes sense. Data privacy is really important, but also so is transparency with this stuff. So I can see how walking that line, is tricky. But I think it's cool that if nothing else, the data, it sounds like the data could, if a keeper, like I said, a cheetah keeper wants to connect with a cheetah reintroduction program that is working with ZIMS, they could connect and share information with them.
For sure.
That's really special. And I actually think that will be something that over, like you said, the next 50 years, you're going to see a lot more of. And I think that's really special. And that's very cool. You keep mentioning your team and your other team and this other team and more team members. How big is Species 360?
We're We're very small, but we're pretty mighty. We're about 50 people right now. That's the biggest we've been since I've been here, and that the vast majority of that's going to be kind of in the software development space. So software developers proper, as well as like the project team that supports them, and that there's a ton of overlap in that team as well. With we have another product that's for botanical records as well, and that's based in the UK and in the Netherlands. And so they're a smaller team, but there's a lot of collaboration between those teams. And our support team is about I got to sort of count because we've moved some folks around, but it's about 6 or 7 people, and then we have our membership development group, which works on kind of finding new members, supporting new initiatives, and then our conservation science team. So it's a lot of really dedicated people, but it's all things considered, considering the scope that we work at. I think we're pretty small.
That's kind of crazy that there's like 50 people that are in charge of you guys disappear and data's just like zoos are back in the dark ages. Like that is really crazy to me. And I know you wouldn't let that happen, but I
can speak to we're working on SOC 2 compliance, and we've got, you have the ability to request a data export of your data, and, our data is hosted online. I can talk about the Google Cloud. We're definitely a very modern, and, we follow all the standards, and all the information is very backed up. That's one of the aspects that we, part of AZA accreditation is being able to prove that your data is in a safe space, and we count as a safe space. So, yeah.
No, that is very cool. Another thing that I'm, very passionate about is animal welfare. And so I'm kind of wondering if, do you feel like ZIMS helps with animal welfare at all?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. One of the projects I got to work on a handful of years ago was care and welfare module inside of ZIMS. There's a lot of different ways organizations are going about tracking that information, from just paper records to ZIMS. There's just a handful of ways you could actually record the work that's being done, and that's really the feature of what we do is we allow a standardized way of recording that information. We follow the WASA 5 domains model of where you can set up pretty much the indicators that your organization is paying attention to with the collection you have. So it's very customizable per institution, and then that basically the idea is that we want to be able to make it easier, for you to show the work you're doing, because the work is happening. And we're not, we can't take any credit for that, but we can create an environment that makes it easier for the individual practitioners to be able to show the work they're doing, and standardize so when you compare notes, you can literally share a template in care and welfare in ZIMS in our network, and so folks can use the same template if they want to. So you can really standardize and kind of create a community of practice around what does welfare monitoring mean. And so we're still at the early days of that, but the initial version of what we do is pretty well adopted. And I'd say that's what we do is we help standardize and create a framework so that folks can do the work they're doing, but also prove the work they're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that I love that this is so much all about standardization of things at zoos, because I have to tell you, as somebody who reaches out to a zoo every week, and the lack of standardization of things just on the PR side, right, which I know you guys don't deal with, but like everybody has different policies, wants to be approached differently. I do something at one facility and then get yelled at for trying the same tactic at another facility to just get in the door, kind of thing. Everything is so different, and I'm constantly amazed by that. And I talk to keepers all the time who sometimes on the record and a lot of times off the record tell me they get a new job, and it's such a different experience that it's very challenging because there isn't a lot of standardization of other things in the zoological field yet. And I think that as we become more of a even more online population, and as people talk more and all that stuff, I think that will start to change. But having that at least on the record side is just so helpful, because I see the detriment of not having standardization I deal with it a lot, actually. I talk to a lot of keepers that do as well. And this is clearly an industry that I love, but like, I do wish that that place, that organizations like the AZA and stuff had more standardization in general. So I love that y'all have made that a thing, at least in the buckets that you have. I think that's really important.
I think I'll give the credit back to the community for thinking about it so long in the past and putting their faith and trust in Species 360 ICES before that to trust us to help kind of shepherd it, because it really is an amazing community of people that understood the value of standardization. I think long before I think there's a PhD thesis or something in there to study how this has worked for so long, but it really has been a pretty amazing community for 50 plus years. So.
Nice. Is there anything else that you want to say before we get to our final two?
I don't think so. No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It's been great listening to I'm impressed with your Zoo News segments. It's not, I know how hard it is to gather that information, so I respect it and thank you for that. It's a service you're doing. So
thank you. And is there a conservation organization you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I realized that, where I got my start was Wolfhaven International, and that would be one I'd definitely shout out. So while I was there, again, they got that cool first feather in their cap with the reintroduction of the Mexican gray wolves. And right now, I think they just opened up another facility somewhere in Montana, so they're growing. It's my wish to always get back there and maybe volunteer again someday. But yeah, so I'd say Wolfhaven International.
Nice. And then I know that you are a computer person, but it's time now, don't you know? We've come to the end of the show, but there's one tale left to go. You're gonna laugh and say, oh no. It's time for the Rossifari poop story.
So I have to put a little bit of an explanation on this. I mentioned I teach at the AZA's institutional records keeping course, and really that's an audience of registrars who work with and bring kind of those standards to standards of data entry for their team. So over the years, there's been some fun kind of terrible notes that registrars have had submitted to them, and part of it's just grammatical errors, and some of it's just folks having to get to something else, so they type it really quickly. So these ones kind of fit into the framework of the poop stories.
Poop story.
So I thought these are examples of notes that were entered into ZIMS by unnamed keepers at unnamed institutions. I won't call anyone out, but hopefully the funny comes across. So there's 3 of them. So keeper found dead on exhibit. So clearly, parse it properly. Loose stool and betadine applied to facial scratches. So found mucus on ground, still coughing. So that was the 3 of them.
Nice.
So that's part of, back to the standardization thing, a lot of it's about, standards of data entry practice as well.
That was awesome. I was wondering if you'd come up with something, and that was solid. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And yeah, thanks for taking the time to do this. It's been fun.
John, thank you very much.
Well, there you have it, folks. A piece of software that manages to be just integral in everything we talk about on this podcast. It's so cool. And it was really fun to get to meet Josh, and we ran into each other a bunch at AZA and talked a bunch of times, and just a really good dude and a really good company. Everyone that I spoke to there was just fantastic, which is, nice. So yeah, just another example of even the people in this industry that aren't the standard keepers, aquarists, vets, trainers, etc., are all just like really good people with a heart for conservation and a love for animals. And yeah, it's just very cool. I'm very grateful to Josh for being on here and for sharing all of that. So yeah, that's really all I've got this week. So let me say thank you quickly to my patrons, especially my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Schenk, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, Jenny Owens, and Kevin Williams. And don't forget, friends, we'll be back here on Friday with Zoo News. But until then, the word credits backwards is Steiderk. The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo.